Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be focusing on Panama and the Panama Canal and the importance of this Central American country. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Dr. Francisco Javier Bonilla is a historian of Latin America specializing in environmental history, infrastructure, and urban development. His research focuses on Panama and the wider Caribbean, examining how water, cities, and the U.S. empire have shaped everyday life across the region. He teaches environment and urban history in Panama and the United States. Dr. Francisco Javier Bonilla, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's jump right into it. But first, could you give us a little flavor of some of the statistics of Panama, say the population, the size of it, the countries to the north, country to the south, major industry, nothing too detailed, but just to jog my memory in particular.
Yeah, Bill. So Panama is a small country and it's an isthmus-shaped country. It's shaped like an isthmus, and it borders with Colombia to the south and Costa Rica to the north. And it is around the size of South Carolina, 75,000 square kilometers, and around 4.5 million people. So not quite 5 yet. And it is, a country that is dominated by the service sector, by its service economy, the tertiary part of a sector of the economy. And it's also a country that has historically been Catholic, but in recent decades, the Protestant movement, what we call the evangelical movement, has grown considerably, and that has significant consequences for the politics of the country as well, as we can see throughout the region.
Mm-hmm. And Panama is a critical country, very important. It links Central America and South America. I know one of your slogans is El Puente del Mundo, bridge to the world, which is extremely important. But I was thinking back about Panama, and we learned that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But the Panamanian Isthmus is such that it actually shows the sun rising in the west, does it not?
I think so. I need to check
That's
on
what the
that.
geographers say. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I need to check that.
It's just with that snake-like configuration, yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, now Panama was created out of Colombia. Basically, as I recall my history, the United States wanted to build a canal, and Panama was part of Colombia for eons, I guess. And they had a civil war or whatever it was. The United States helped take it away from Colombia, and so now it is a separate country. But let's talk a little bit about the canal and the importance of it. How important is that canal to the people of Panama and to the people around the world?
Yes. So Panama was part of Colombia for around 80 years, right? So it is a significant amount of time after independence. And there was a railroad before the canal controlled by American capital that linked the Caribbean and the Pacific to let, especially for the gold rush, to let people who wanted to hunt for gold to have an easy way to cross over to California. But then the French tried to build the canal when Panama was a part of Colombia, and they failed. So the project, was, up in the air, and then the U.S. continued the project with an independent Panama. And since Panama was independent from Colombia as an independent republic, it has had at least a canal project, right, for the first 10 years, and then an operating canal. But Panama did not control that canal for the 20th century. And so it was a foreign asset, a strategic asset of the United States federal government.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the 70s, the Jimmy Carter administration had basically, I guess you could say, relinquished because of the strikes and the protests and what have you. The Panamanians wanted control of their own canal. It was their canal, even though the Americans built it, back around 1907 or somewhere along in there. I can't remember the exact date or the exact year, but then it reverted back to Panama, and that's where it's been. Now, there's been talk of the current administration wanting to take the canal back. That's not possible, is it? I mean, legally, that's not possible.
Well, under the current treaty agreements, it would not be legal. So it would have to create a scenario where the current treaty agreements no longer hold. Because the canal operates under a regime of neutrality, which was the agreement entered in the 70s, right? And under this regime, no country can have preferential access. Although under this regime, the United States reserved a right to intervene and pretty much is the guarantor of this neutrality. But it is on paper, a neutrality, right?
Exactly. It certainly is. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. And the canal is of such importance to everybody in the world. It's in all of our best interest to keep it healthy and to keep it safe. And of course, right now, as I understand, there's a drought or there's a water shortage, and the canal depends upon millions of gallons of water, I guess, every day to move those huge ships from the from the Caribbean into the Pacific.
Yes. So right now there is no drought, but the problem is that Panama has a marked wet season and a dry season, and the dry seasons are getting longer, and this is hindering the capacity of the canal to store fresh water to ensure that it can function at its optimum level. So it has been forced to reduce the drought of some of the ships in 2023 because of water shortages. And this is a scenario that's going to be aggravated by climate change, right? So it is not just a one drought, but it's that droughts are becoming more and more common, and the dry periods are becoming more and more are lasting longer and longer.
Mm-hmm. How do the Panamanians view the canal and the fact that there's been talk, not lately, but before, of the Trump administration saying it's going to take the canal back? What type of discussions going on in Panama, and not just there, but in Colombia, Venezuela, Costa Rica, and in other countries around you?
Well, in Panama, when the president of the United States started making these announcements, there was fear in many sectors of society. There was some protest, and the government over the next few months kowtowed to pretty much all of the demands that the United States made, with the exception of having its ships go through free of payment. That is still one thing that has not been completely given to the United States yet. But there was widespread anger, but also one sector of the population actually welcomed these announcements, because this might signal a change in the regime that is administering the canal. And this regime has some of these have generated resentment in many parts of the population, because Panama is one of the most unequal countries in the world. So its political class is very much always under the telescope of civil society.
Mm-hmm. That's very important. We'll come back in just a moment and talk about income inequality and also gunboat diplomacy, which I'm sure is a term that you've heard quite frequently. But for the moment, well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a podcast or maybe a computer, you like our shows, please feel free to share them. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at a very critical link to not only the United States and South America, but for the whole world, come right down to it, and that's Panama and the canal in particular. My guest today is Dr. Francisco Javier Bonilla, who is a historian of Latin America, specializing in environmental history, infrastructure, and urban development. Javier, we were talking a moment ago about, well, let's talk about income inequality. For years, the United States, until recently, used to point at South America and say, look, this is the most unequal income area of the world. Income inequality was horrible. You had a small group of rich people, a little bit of a middle class, and a burgeoning lower class, poorer population. That's no longer the case. The United States has now moved into that category. But you say Panama is there also. What helped create that? Did the canal do it? Or was it a purchase of the key resources by the uber billionaires? Or what exactly caused it?
Mm-hmm. So there are some of these inequalities that go back to the colonial period under Spanish rule, right? And this inequality changes forms to adjust to different historical periods. But in the 20th century, this is a inequality that breaks along racial lines, uh, income lines, but also spatial. And what the canal did when they built the canal is that they concentrated all of the resources of the country in one particular part, right? These parts of the country that are adjoining the canal, that are adjoining what becomes the Panama Canal zone in the 20th century, which was an area controlled by the United States that had United States purchasing power. So obviously that distorts the national economy, and everything is made to revolve around this enclave. And that exacerbated spatial inequality, right? The incomes in Panama City and in the areas around the canal are much higher than in the rest of the country. And this also generates other sorts of problems because, right, all of these people need to drink water. And since they're next to the canal, the water that they drink is the water that the canal also uses to function, right? And this generates more and more pressures on the same reservoirs that of fresh water that the canal needs to operate, right? So these are decisions from hundred years ago that still reverberate and impact the resilience that our urban systems can have in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what about your media? What we're experiencing in the United States right now is that a lot of ultra-conservative billionaires are buying up the media outlets and are basically shoving out any mainstream discussion, any progressive discussion, and putting on a lot of, ultra-conservative discussion. Come right down to it. Is that an experience you're having in Panama, or is it a little bit different? I know several of the Latin American countries I've been in have not, even though they're poor to some degree, they're developing countries, they still have sort of a vibrant media to some degree, and that is dissipating quickly in the United States. How's Panama doing?
Yes, so Panama's media is very much corporate controlled, and it is controlled by the large capital holding groups that we have in Panama, which are, you know, also very much involved in some of our very well-known businesses, such as Copa Airlines, for example, which is a Panamanian airline. Those same money interests are behind some of our biggest media conglomerates. And all of our political candidates, the big ones, they have the support of pretty much all the big uh, TV channels, media conglomerates. So there's very much a uniformity in the discourse that they foster. And you can see this, for example, when we look at the issues around the canal. Um, when we see that the Panama Canal is expanding its footprint and is right now is going to look into dam another river that is outside of the watershed, right? And by damming this new river, you're going to displace a lot of peasants, and these people need to be compensated, need to be relocated. This is a big project that is going to reshape the geography of the central part of the country. And you have some critical coverage in the media about this project. For example, what is going to happen to the peasants? What is going to happen to these people? Why did it come to this? Why do we need to keep doing this? But there's really no conversation of what is the alternative to damming, right? What is the alternative to just keep damming the country and giving more and more water for the canal, right? These types of questions are really shunned out of our media because of the corporate control, which are so tied to the status quo, that is so tied to the functioning of the canal and to the constant expansion of the waterway.
Yeah, that's a major discussion that's taking place in the United States and apparently Panama and other countries of the world, that you have too many, you have too much corporate influence into your politics. You have politicians who have to get money to win elections, and to do that, you have to go to where the money is, and that's usually the uber rich, and their agendas are not aligning with the agendas of the Panamanian people in many cases, or the American people in many cases.
Mhm.
Well, let's talk about Panama before we run out of time here. There's so many
Mhm.
issues. What do you recommend as far as solutions to help deal with the environmental problems, the political problems? You can't do anything about the geography. I guess you can with the
Mhm.
damming. That's one issue.
Yeah.
But what recommendations do you have to make the Panama Canal viable and to make sure it's there for everybody to use
Mhm.
it and not to destroy it or to damage it?
Well, in terms of the environmental consequences of the canal and its expansion, Panamanians, we need to start treating the canal not as um, our ruler, but as our asset. And our asset among a list of other assets, such as our biodiversity, our agricultural lifestyles, our rural lifestyles, our ecosystems, tourism, and other types of alternatives that can be lost if we keep damming for the canal, right? The canal is a great business, but it needs to be looked at beyond just the green of the dollars, and to look at what are these dollars costing us. It's not just the fresh water, it's also what is lost when we move that fresh water from one basin to another. Um, and in terms of the geopolitical tensions that are taking place right now, I think that Panama needs to look into the international bodies, the regional bodies, to try to have a third party uh, committee or entity to fact check some of the statements that are coming from the global north, right? And to see who is running the Panama Canal, right? And to have some type of international entity who fact checks and who monitors the functioning of these vital choke points in global commerce or in global maritime transit, right? These are something that Panama can do to cover itself from some of these statements, because the difference in size of our diplomacy with that of Washington prevents us from really doing a counterweight by ourselves. We need to internationalize these issues, like it was done in the 1970s when the treaties with the United States were achieved, right? It was an international struggle for a more just functioning of the waterway. And this is what we need today as well.
Mhm. And there's been a huge discussion. We talk about major issues as to the role of the public sector and the private sector. And in many cases, the private sector, or that's the way to go. They're the ones to do the job. They can do it more efficiently and more effectively. But what we're running into in some countries, especially the US, is that the private sector is buying up a lot of entities, and then they start cost cutting, slashing. They don't maintain the property properly. They fire people willy-nilly. They have really no concern whatsoever for maintaining it and to make it a more effective operation. They just want to get the more money for the shareholder. That's exactly what it is. And we're drifting into this really dangerous area. And in some cases, the public sector really needs to control items like the Panama Canal or some others. I'm saying in perhaps more rational heads would prevail as far as running the place. But anyway, before we are just about out of time, but let me ask you very briefly, we've seen where there have been a lot of extrajudicial uh, bombings, really, of Venezuelan fishing boats, and by the U.S. government claiming that they're cartels. There, to my knowledge, I have not seen it. Maybe it's out there. I don't know, but I have seen no proof that most of these boats that have been blown out of the water have had cartel members. What kind of discussion have you had in Panama? And I'm sure Venezuela's got some major discussions underway, but in the last minute or so, what is the situation there?
Yes. So the media will not cover this um, in a way that would raise such questions, because the Panamanian government is very compliant with everything that Washington asks. This is not a recent thing, this is a historical thing. And the current president is very friendly towards the US. And, they, for example, moved some um, stations to the Darien Gap as soon as he was elected, right, to start what could be interpreted as moving the border from the Rio Grande Valley to the Darien, right? Because it starts from there, the journey up, and he was very um, compliant in moving it and helping the United States in that way. So, and this government is also very anti-Chavista. This very anti-Venezuela, government. So anything that makes them look bad, they're gonna go with it, and they're not gonna question it. That makes and remember that the the opposition leader that was elected as the president of Venezuela, and there he is very friendly with the government of Panama, and he goes often. And actually, the ballots from that election that certify that Maduro lost are actually held in Panama, right? That just gives you an idea of the where Panama positions itself in this geopolitical situation. So the discussion that should be had about this issue is not happening in Panama because of structural reasons.
As one skeptic said, it's not how you vote, but who counts the ballots. And that has been the case in South America and Central America for decades, and some places in the United States, but not so much as it is now. But anyway, Dr. Francisco Javier Bonilla, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.